Hello and welcome to another episode of the Science on the Edge podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Darcy, and today's episode is going to be a little different than my usual format. Normally, the format is kind of lecture-based. I give a little talk on topics such as artificial intelligence or stem cells or genetic engineering. Occasionally, I will talk about ethics, such as my talk about atheism and the ethics of genetic engineering. And in one episode, I was actually interviewed by the founder of the Skeptics in the Hub podcast series, which was quite fun. I quite enjoyed being interviewed. But this is a first for me. I'm actually going to be performing an interview. My guest today is renowned human rights activist Yasmine Mohammed, author of the book Unveiled. I'm going to be discussing her experiences with Islam, growing up as a Muslim in a Western culture, in Canada specifically. I'm going to be talking about atheism briefly, about her thoughts on Islam, about woke culture and liberalism. And I'm also going to be covering a few other areas. Now, we don't get to talk about how she left Islam during this interview. We just didn't get to that point. There was just so much information to cover. But her book, Unveiled, covers that quite well. So before I start the interview, I think it's probably a good idea if I give you an overview of her book and read out a few reviews of her book. These can be found at her website, yasminemohammed.com. Okay, so here we go. So this is from her bio on her website. Canadian human rights activist Yasmine Mohammed advocates for the rights of women living within Islamic majority countries, as well as those who struggle under religious fundamentalism. She's also the founder of Free Hearts, Free Minds, an organization that provides psychological support for free thinkers living within Muslim majority countries, where the state-sanctioned punishment for leaving Islam is death. Her book, Unveiled, is a memoir polemic that recalls her experiences growing up in a fundamentalist Islamic household and her arranged marriage to a member of Al-Qaeda. In it, she sheds light on the religious trauma that so many women still today are unable to discuss. Yasmine is a member of the prestigious Center for Inquiry, CFI, Speakers Bureau. She is also on the board of advisors for the Brighter Brains Institute, an organization that builds secular schools. She has spoken in Canadian Parliament on M103 and Islamophobia, and has been featured in many mainstream media publications such as CNN, CBC, BBC, ABC Australia, Al Jazeera, New York Times, and many others. She's spoken in Ivy League universities such as Harvard, Stanford, and Dartmouth, and for many organizations, including the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Hayyan Ursi Foundation, Ayn Rand Institute, and Think Inc. Now, her book has made quite a stir both in the West and in Islamic majority countries, where I believe it is. It really is the subject of quite a bit of debate. I'm now going to read some reviews of this book. So first, from the human rights activist Hayyan Ursi. All those interested in how humans overcome adversity must read this book. Yasmine is one of the bravest people of our time. She's a shining example to all of us. Now here's a review from Majid Nawaz, who is a British Muslim and has had a very interesting life himself and some interesting experiences. He was radicalized at an early age, and he came to be quite liberal, but it was a long journey for Majid, and he did actually spend a bit of time in an Egyptian prison as part of the process. So what does Majid Nawaz say about Unveiled? Okay, so Majid Nawaz. Insider personal accounts form powerful testimonies, deeply moving at times, depressing, but filled with hope for what can be instead of what is. Yasmine's story is no exception. Ex-Muslim women are likely to be the most oppressed minority group around the world. Name one other personal choice that can lead to honor-based violence coupled with mob execution in countries that we consider our allies. No liberal is worth the salt if they neglect these minorities within minorities. And Muslims worldwide must recognize this tyranny within our ranks. I hope Yasmine's brave personal account can contribute to raising such desperately needed awareness. Here is a review from Richard Dawkins. Too many of us fail to realize that the principal victims of the unspeakable cruelty that fervent adherence to Islam inspires, not to mention the bossy control freakery that invades even minute details of everyday life, are Muslims themselves, especially women. Yasmine Mohammed's heart-rending, brave and beautifully written book brings this home in a way that should finally change the minds of even the most deeply misguided apologists in our well-meaning liberal midst. And finally, here is a review from Sam Harris. Women and free thinkers in traditional Muslim communities inherit a double burden. If they want to live in the modern world, they must confront not only the theocrats in their homes and schools, but many secular liberals whose apathy, sanctimony, and hallucinations of racism throw yet another veil over their suffering. In Unveiled, Yasmine Mohammed accepts this challenge as courageously as anyone I've ever met, putting the lie to the dangerous notion that criticizing the doctrine of Islam is a form of bigotry. Let her wisdom and bravery inspire you. Before playing the interview, I should say that there's a little bit of lag in a few places. I'm based in the UK and Yasmine is in Canada. So I think the connection once or twice, a few times, had a bit of lag. So it may seem that I'm talking over Yasmine in a few places, but hopefully that doesn't take too much from the experience. It really is a fascinating interview. Okay, so without further ado, I give you Yasmine Mohammed. Enjoy. Okay, so welcome to Science on the Edge. I'm Dr. Mike Darcy, and with me I have Yasmine Mohammed. Yasmine, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be
absolutely
here.
Welcome. Now, I will have given an intro before this talk started. So my audience will know a little bit about you already, but in your own words, could you just tell my audience who is Yasmine Mohammed? Obviously, you can't cover all the details. We'll get to that later in the interview, but in summary.
So in summary, I am a troublemaker. I'm the kind of, as a child growing up, I always asked a lot of questions, and I was not satisfied with answers that didn't make any sense. And so that meant that it was problematic for me because I was being raised in a very fundamentalist household where you're supposed to just shut your mouth, shut your brain and just get in line and listen and do as you're told. And so, eventually in life, through my book Unveiled, you'll see that it's a series of me just trying to pop my head up and then getting knocked down again, pop my head up, getting knocked down again. And the hardest I ever got knocked down was when I was forced into a marriage with a man named Hassan Marzouk, who is a member of Al Qaeda.
And he's currently in prison, is that correct?
Correct. He's in prison in Egypt. And I had a daughter with him. And when I had my daughter, I found this courage from somewhere that just made me, I just wanted to protect her. And I didn't want her to have the same life I had had. And so I found somehow the strength to get her and myself away from him and away from my family. And we started our life anew. I was never allowed to go to university. It was never an option for me. And I started to go to university, and I went you know, for years and years, and I'm now a university professor. So I just kind of did that, you know, I just pushed and pushed and went against everything that I had always wanted to push against, but didn't have the courage. My daughter gave me that courage. And now I've been living a free life and happily married to a wonderful man. And we have a new daughter together.
Mm.
And I saw that there was a lot of confusion out there in the world. It was actually an episode of Bill Maher with Sam Harris was the guest, as well as Ben Affleck. It's an infamous
I've seen that
episode.
episode myself, actually.
Yeah.
I know it sounds bad, but I really wanted to hit the guy. I really, really
Yeah.
did. I mean,
It was very frustrating. Yeah.
especially considering just a few years before, when I was an undergraduate, one of my favorite movies back in the 90s was actually Dogma. And
yeah, exactly.
I just loved how Dogma basically, well,
yeah.
it kind of took the piss out of established religion. And
it was really well done.
Netflix
Yeah.
says what he says, but
Mm-hmm.
perhaps if you could go through that.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, that's the liberal hypocrisy right there in a nutshell. You know, you expect our fellow liberals to be supporting us exactly because we have the same values and we have the same ideals, exactly like the movie Dogma. We're watching that and we're totally all in unison supporting it. But then when it comes to this particular religion, somehow it's gross and racist all of a sudden, when it's exactly the same thing. It's just a dogma that deserves to be criticized.
It does seem that that Christianity is okay to criticize, and I criticize Christianity all the time. I'm from a Roman Catholic background myself, and as a child, I'm naturally left-handed. But the Catholic school that I went to, I was hit with 2 wooden rulers that were nailed into a crucifix on my left hand whenever I tried to hold a pen with my left hand, because apparently that's Satan's hand. So I've always criticized Christianity because of that. And my wife, Sophia, she's Greek Orthodox. She's from Cyprus. And they are very Christian themselves. And we both seemed to become atheists at about the same time as teenagers, when we just questioned the doctrine and why should we believe this? So we questioned our faiths, but then whenever either one of us questions anyone else's faith, we are basically told to stay in our lane and that it's wrong to do so. And in fact, I've lost so many friends, call them friends, but whatever, just because I've said things which they have deemed to be bigotry, because I've criticized other faiths. What are your thoughts on that, by the way, on this idea of someone in one faith criticizing someone in another faith? But I think that is the key
it's not
point.
even that's not, I mean, that's the case from your perspective, but from my perspective, it was my faith.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, imagine if somebody told you, you can't criticize Catholicism because that makes you Catholicophobic, that makes you a bigot. Do you know, like, it would be that it's really jarring. You know, like, who are you to tell me that I can't speak about my own experience? You know, that makes me racist somehow against an ideology. So it's incredibly frustrating.
That I've made it up about being hit on the knuckle with the cross, because that's
I've heard that many times. No, I've heard that many times about the whole left-handed thing. As soon as you said you were left-handed, I was like, oh, I know where this is going. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's because I'm aware that I'm not actually looking at my questions now. I've already gone off piste, so let me start going through some of the questions, because I think some of them hopefully are quite good, and maybe will help our audience to understand your experience and what it was like growing up as a Muslim in Canada. Well, in a Western country generally. I think it's probably quite similar in Britain, in America, in Canada. Would you say it's quite a similar experience for Muslims in those countries?
Yes, definitely. I agree.
Definitely. Okay, so let's see. So my first question actually is, could you give me a little bit of an overview of your childhood, and specifically, could you tell me a bit about Mr. Fabro? Because he sounds quite inspirational.
Oh, yes. I told him I'm going to adopt him as my father. He has agreed. So when I was so I had gone to Islamic schools Islamic school, it really was just a mosque and parents that felt that they had some, expertise, not any, education or anything like that. But if they just felt like, oh, I can teach math. Oh yeah, I'll teach English. Do you know what I mean? Just like that. And so
do you
that
know
was the schooling I'd had.
Educational qualification to teach in a faith school?
No. So
No?
we have in Canada, we have a system called the independent school system.
Okay.
Where you just have you decide that for yourself. You decide it's a problem. I have a problem with religious schools. I have a problem with them not being regulated. I have a problem with their curriculums not being regulated. I have many problems with religious schools. And obviously I'm speaking from my personal experience. But yeah, so as I left this religious school, because I was entering high school and they didn't have an Islamic high school quite yet. They did very soon after, because Saudi Arabia provided the money to build one. But at the time there wasn't
provide
one.
the money to people throughout the world. Is
Correct.
that why Islam seems to why younger Muslim people in the West seem to be becoming more radicalized? Do you think this funding of religious schools by Saudi Arabia?
Well, that was definitely the case for me. So what had happened was the mosque initially was being run by an imam who was from India, and he was very, just a relaxed Muslim. And when the funding came from Saudi Arabia, everything changed. That imam was plucked out and he was replaced with an imam from Egypt with a long beard, and his wife came dressed head to toe in black. We'd never seen that in our community before. And the kids were like, it's a penguin, it's a ninja, it's a bat. It was like, we'd never seen, and then of course, everybody started to become much more and more, religious, much more fundamentalist, much more following the Saudi way of Islam versus the Indian way of Islam.
How old were you at this point, by the way?
I was in middle school, so I'd say probably about 11 years old or something.
Yeah. And you, at the time, you didn't wear the hijab or anything else?
No, I was wearing it. My family were always fundamentalists. Let's get that straight. Yeah, that was always my experience. So when
I thought that was just after your mother got a second husband. Yes.
Yes. Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yes. But, as far as I was like 5 years old when she married that man. So, so as in my family, we were already very strict.
Okay.
But I could see, we were the strictest in the community in the beginning. So the man my mother married was one of the strictest people. My mom was one of the people that everybody looked up to because she was the most religious. And then when this new imam came in, and he was much stricter, and this woman covered herself up even more, which made her an even better person. And so then they started to become the new thing to strive to be liked. They started to be the new pinnacle.
Okay.
And so that's why the whole congregation just became much more fundamentalist.
And what did the older people in the community think of all of this? The people that were, more liberal, presumably, and of the Indian model?
Yeah, there's a lot of peer pressure. So I don't know, how things are in the Catholic Church or how much pressure there is from the rest of the parish, or I don't know what they're called in a Catholic church.
Well, the church.
The church.
Just the church.
Yeah, there's
all the other churches
from the people,
churches.
The other church goers,
yes.
They're very, there's a lot of pressure from the community. When you are living in a non-Muslim country, your community of Muslims is like it's a very tight-knit cult. So everybody knows everything about everybody. You know what I mean? Like you're just, and everybody's policing everybody. So think of it like the Hasidic Jews in New York.
Mm. Actually, we have.
So I don't know if you're very familiar with
those in London as well. Actually, there's quite
yeah,
a few. Yeah.
yeah, or a Mormon group, or Jehovah's Witness, or there's certain groups that have that same kind of dynamic where they're all watching each other. They all know what each other's daughters are doing. You know what I mean? Like there's just real policing going on.
Okay.
And there's a judgment constantly of who's better and who's more practicing and whatever. So the pressure was there to push things in that direction, and therefore they moved in that direction.
And did you resist from the beginning? Were you against this push?
Well, I was against it when I was 5 years old, when it first entered into my life. But then I stopped. You're a child. You just stop fighting. You just start accepting. You're not happy about it, but there's nothing you can do. You could just grumble and go on with your life,
Was it 5 years old that you first wore a hijab or a niqab? Or
no, I was 5 years old when my mom first married the fundamentalist Muslim and introduced all that into our lives.
Okay.
So before that, we were, my mom grew up very secular in Egypt. She didn't have a religious upbringing at all. Nobody in her family was wearing hijab. It was a typical Egyptian, like if you look at the pictures of Egypt prior to the 80s, people were just walking around like they looked no different than the people would look in America or Canada or in the UK.
The same with Iran.
Same with Iran, same with Libya, same with Afghanistan even. Yeah, you name it. All of those countries were just the whole world was progressing together. And then what happened was a very anti-West push. So in Egypt, that anti-West push, it started with Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was one of the presidents, and he changed. Egypt is North Africa, so he changed Egypt's name to the Arab Republic of Egypt, and it started to become like, oh, we're Arab now. It's like we're completely colonized to the point that we don't even know who we are anymore. We completely lost our culture, lost our language, and now we're going to pretend that we're Arabs.
Are true Arabs really just from around the Saudi Arabia?
From Arabia.
Yeah.
We have nothing to do with Arabia. We're in Africa. But no, there's like I think about 22 Arab countries right now. But my meaning for what I'm trying to explain is that there was like an Islamic colonization that looked like Arab colonization, because Islam and Arab culture are so intertwined. And so when you become Muslim, you change your name to an Arabic name, right? You start wearing this clothing, which is the clothing of the Bedouin Arabs. You start reading Quran in Arabic. You pray in Arabic. Like it's very hard to disentangle the just Arabness and Islam are very intertwined. They're not the exact same thing. There's obviously the majority of Muslims are not even Arab at all. But
how does this link in with the difference between Sunni and Shiite? Because obviously in Iran they're primarily Shiites, yes, and not of an Arabic background.
And that's exactly it. So they don't like Arabs, and so they're like pushing against the Arabness, and so they have their own flavor of Islam, and that's Shia, and that's a constant thing, right? So Iran and Saudi Arabia hate each other because they're both vying to be like the Islam, But to go back to my story, you asked me about Mr. Fabro. We never really got there. So I was going to Islamic schools, and then I started going to a public school for the first time. And that's where I started to have non-Muslim friends. And that was something that my mom didn't like at all. And so she said, I'm going to take you out of school again. So for grade 9, I didn't go to school. I just stayed home. And I was really upset that she was going to take me out of school, and I was depressed. And so Mr. Fabro asked me, are you okay? What's going on with you? You seem down. And so I told him about what was going on at home. I told him about the abuse, the physical abuse that was happening. And I showed him the bruises. And so he alerted the police, who alerted child services, and, it eventually went to court. And I was really excited because I was so happy. I thought, I'm finally going to get out of this house. I'm not going to have to live this life anymore.
And who was committing this abuse on you?
The man that my mother married.
So your mother wasn't involved in any of this, so?
I mean, she was complicit. She wasn't the one tying me up and whipping me, but she was right there. I was a child. He wouldn't be able to do that to me without her consent.
Understand.
So, so when I told Mr. Fabro about it and it went to court, eventually the judge said to me, that's the way your family chooses to discipline you. So sorry, I'm not, I'm just going to have to respect their cultural differences. And that's the way that they wish to discipline their child.
Wow.
So at the time, I basically heard him telling me, sorry, you had the shit luck of being born to an Egyptian family, so you're just going to have to deal with it. Had your family been from Sweden or Ireland or, whatever, I'd protect you. But your family happens to be.
Sorry, I was just going to say, do you think that he genuinely thought that, or he was fearful of the consequences if he got involved in the whole wasp's nest, so to speak, that might, and it may be considered to be Islamophobic and et cetera, or do you think that was his actual opinion?
I don't know. I can't say for sure, but I do know that I don't care. At the end of the day, it was the same result. I've been bombarded by people who used to be in social work and have sent me messages telling me that they have left that career and they had to choose different careers because they were haunted by the faces of all the children that they had to walk away from. And not just in Canada, like I had a lot of messages from people in Australia as well because of the Aboriginal community in Australia as well. There's all sorts of atrocities that are going on with young girls there being married off at 13 to older men and all sorts of things like that. And the government, the social workers are not allowed to intervene because the government has deemed that as their cultural choices. And, in the UK, you have a similar issue with FGM. FGM is rampant in your country.
It was criminalized, I think.
Yes, it was criminalized. Right.
Finally.
Sure. But it's about when it happens, nobody is getting prosecuted. Instead, they're getting educated. They're given pamphlets and told, hey, you know what? You shouldn't take a razor to your daughter's genitals. Don't do that.
I think there's been one prosecution so far in the UK for this.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that prosecution was only made because the person, the child in question almost died. So you can't really get away with not prosecuting.
Yeah. And that's good to see. But my point being, it was rampant for years and years. And people turn a blind eye to it because they say it's a cultural difference. Well, what you're saying when you say that is, I won't protect this girl because she happens to be from the wrong culture. If it was a blonde hair, blue-eyed mother or father that took a razor to their blonde hair, blue-eyed daughter, those people would have been in prison 30 years ago. It wouldn't have taken 30 years for them to finally prosecute somebody from when it was made illegal. And, the same thing with your rape gangs in the UK. Why did those go on for so long? Thousands and thousands of girls. How did that happen? Well, it happened because people were too afraid to speak up because they didn't want to be called Islamophobic. So at the end of the day, whether you're doing it because you actually believe it or whether you're doing it because you're afraid of the mob, the result is the same. You're leaving a child to either be abused, to be raped, to be mutilated. You're complicit in that. You are empowering that behavior, which is the subtitle of my book, How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. By not speaking up and by being afraid of being called Islamophobic or a bigot or whatever, then you're basically choosing to protect yourself from bad words. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're empowering these people to continue to victimize these girls. It's a choice, you know, and the judge made that choice.
That was actually a point I was going to make later in the interview, but I did have something here about the grooming gangs. I'm actually, well, you can probably tell from this accent, this is a northern accent. I'm actually from the same part of the world that all of this happened. I'm from northern England. And there's a huge Muslim community in parts of the north of England, and they are very separate from the rest. So, for example, I'm about a 20-minute drive from a town called Bolton. That's where I was born, and Bolton is pretty much divided in half: the white half and the Muslim half. And they do not mix in any way. And if you try to go into the wrong street, if you're from the wrong race, there will be problems. And there are faith schools, and they are separate schools. And if you go into, which I wouldn't, but if you went into the market, for example, in Bolton, and you listen to anyone of a Muslim background speaking, they will not be speaking English, and they will be interacting with each other, and they will be dressed in Islamic, well, in Arabic, I should say, attire. And this sort of, there's a sort of barrier between the two peoples. And it seems almost like the police are so hyper aware of that barrier that they do not want to offend. And when all of this happened with the grooming gangs, and it was atrocious. I mean, I know it made the news everywhere in the world, but I mean, it was absolutely atrocious. The girls in question were from, well, they were white women primarily, from usually from care homes. So they were women that were girls that were brought up in care. And they were preyed upon by these men who were primarily, well, not primarily, always of an Islamic background. And it went on for years. And when it eventually came out and something was done about it, there was an advertising campaign on the TV to try and make people aware of grooming gangs. But they didn't want to be racist in the campaign. So in the grooming gangs, it was white people trying to attract people into grooming gangs. There were no Muslims in the adverts at all, and it just seemed strange.
It's like trying to warn children not to take drugs, but you can't say the word drugs. You know what I mean? So how are you warning? It didn't serve as a warning if it wasn't even saying the truth, you know?
Exactly. So obviously you've talked a little bit about the result of the court trial, so to speak. What happened after that? What happened to you? What was your life like when you went back home?
It was really bad. My mother was very angry at me. She, like I said, I was taken out of school, so I was just at home with her 24/7. And it was, you know, she was very angry that I was trying to, it's kind of like if you're in the mafia and you go and you tell the police, you go reaching out to the authorities to tell them about what's happening. You know what I mean? You're considered the rat. You are like the lowest of the low. You know, you're worse than the actual mafia murderers. You know, like being a rat's the worst thing. So that's how I was seen, because I went to the non-believers for help from a believer. So the way you were talking about it, exactly the way you described it, is there's this world and there's this world. You can see each other, but you do not interact. There's a bubble in between you. And from our perspective, from when I was being raised, it was, these are the good and these are the bad. These are the righteous that are going to heaven, and these are the ones that are going to burn in hell. So, there's an ayah in the Quran that says Muslims shouldn't even befriend non-Muslims. So it's not even about, you should have nothing to do with each other. You should not be like, it's just like if you're a non-Muslim, you are like beyond the pale. And so for me to go to these people and actually ask them for help was something that was unfathomably, it was such a betrayal. I was such a horrible person for doing that. And there was no coming back from that.
Well, were the social services involved in any way after that court case? They didn't check on you or?
No.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Just
so you were on your own from that point onwards.
I was on my own from that point onwards, and that was a very bad time.
How old are you at this point, by the way?
So I think I'd be about 13 or 14.
Okay.
13, yeah.
Okay.
So
how did you get
that's
out?
when I tried to kill myself at that age. Yeah. How did I get out? So eventually, my mom and the man she was married to had a falling out with another member of the community. And that member of the community threatened to tell the authorities that I wasn't in school because he wanted something like to hang over their head. So I was used as a pawn, but it worked in my favor. So because in Canada, legally, they're not allowed to take me out of school. I have to be in school up until the age of 16. And so because I wasn't in school, they were doing something illegal by keeping me home. And so he said, yeah, I'm going to tell on you, basically. And so they had to send me back to school.
Okay.
So yeah, that's how I got out. So for grade 10, I really was just depressed, introverted. I had like one friend the whole year. I was
This is in a
broken.
faith school, yes?
No, because the faith school hadn't been built yet. Yeah.
Ah, yes, of course. Yeah.
Well, it had, but not the high school part.
Okay.
And then I started by grade 11 is where I met my friend Tiffany, who I dedicate my book to. And she's the one that sort of pulled me out of the darkness and helped me to just to stop blaming myself and to start seeing the reality around me, and to recognize really that this religion that had such a hold on my mind was lunacy, And so, I think chapter 5 of my book is all about my friendship with Tiffany and her very gentle way of just pointing out things to me like one of the things I talk about is, as a Muslim, you have to enter the bathroom with your right foot and you have to leave with your left foot. Otherwise, you're going to be possessed by the devil because devils live in the bathroom. It sounds crazy now as two atheists chatting, but at the time, it really felt like this was true. I have to say this little prayer.
Really, but from a few hundred years ago.
Yeah. So I have to say a little prayer and I go in with my left foot. And so she's like, listen, Yaz, just go to the bathroom. just walk into the bathroom. I'm like, Tiffany, I can't. I'm going to get possessed. Like, you don't understand. She's like, sweetheart, do you have any idea how many people around this planet are going to the bathroom every day? And none of them are getting possessed. Do you really think that, the devils are going to choose you specifically, the ones that are living in your bathroom?
So at the time, you're still believing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I was terrified, but she convinced it, she let me see that it was just it was really ridiculous what I was doing. But you know, you're brainwashed, you're indoctrinated in something for so long. It's such fear-based indoctrination, and it's incredibly effective. You know, when you're 5 years old and you're given in extreme detail the punishments that will happen to you in the grave as you are waiting for the day of judgment. And when the day of judgment comes, you're thrown in hell and you burn there for eternity, and your flesh is all burned off, and then it magically appears again, and then it's burned off again, and every single time it's burned off, it hurts just as much as the time before. You never get desensitized, and blah 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 blah. And all of these stories, when you're 5 years old, you know, it sticks and it stays there. And then when you're an adult, you never really take a moment to question it, because it's so much a part of you, you know. It's already been accepted.
I think this is similar to how Catholicism was. So, for example, when I visit Cyprus, where my wife is from, a family are from a village up in the mountains, and there's a church halfway up the mountain, a very small church. And you walk into this church, and the walls are emblazoned with paintings of hell. And it's just people having their skin flayed. It's people burning on fires, people with their head, people being decapitated. And this is all over the church that little children go to pray.
Yes, exactly. Right? So yeah, just in case your imagination isn't vivid enough, let's paint murals for you, so lest you forget.
That will happen to you. That will happen to you if you if you eat meat on a Friday instead of fish.
Yeah. So it's absolutely ridiculous rules, but you don't question them when you're brainwashed. And so it was really a big job for her to, you know, I really commend her. I don't know where she got the patience, because I don't have the patience for that. Like when I know somebody is brainwashed into their religion, I don't bother. I don't try. I don't try talking Muslim people out of their religion. I feel like, you know, that's your business. You got to do what you got to do. Like when you're ready, or if you're willing to question it, you'll find a way. You know, life is so different now than it used to be back then. Now you've got YouTube videos, you've got Twitter, you've got Facebook, you know. So much. But back then it was really hard. You know, you lived in your own bubble, you lived in your own community, and it was, and everybody else was too afraid to say anything because they didn't want to come off as racist or bigoted or whatever. So everybody was like, oh, I totally respect what you're doing, even though they know that what we're doing is totally stupid, right?
You've actually reminded me of a little quote from you, actually. I was watching, I can't actually remember where you gave the talk. I've watched quite a few quite a few YouTube videos of you just recently, just to prepare for this. And there was a quote that stood out. Let me just find it here. Where is it? Okay, so this was an interview, and there was a Muslim, I assume he was an imam of some sort, who stood up in the audience, and he asked you if you would debate with him about Islam, and your response, and this is in quotes, was, no, for the same reason I wouldn't debate with a flat earther or an anti-vaxxer, which I found very funny, by the way. He didn't find it quite so funny himself.
Yeah. But, you know, it's true. Like, how do you have a debate with somebody who is so far away? You know what I mean? It's like having a debate about whether unicorns are blue or purple. You know, like
they're definitely purple. They're definitely purple.
That's right. You're bluest. But yeah, there's no room for conversation there. And I know what I was like when I was indoctrinated. I know that there was no getting through to me. I truly believed that this was the truth, and that, you know, women were given all their rights under Islam, and I accepted that I was lesser than, and that I was subordinate, and that men are on this earth to take care of, like to lord over women.
Is it true that the word of a woman is worth half the word of a man?
Correct. Yeah. Men are responsible and the guardians of women is what it says in the Quran. And if women try to, if you fear that a woman, that your wife might be arrogant or disobedient, then there's like these 3 steps, right? The first step is you admonish her. And if she doesn't listen, then you don't sleep with her in her bed. And if she still doesn't listen, then you beat her into submission. So, you know, these are all the things, you know, I was forced to believe that these were the words of some almighty creator of the universe. So who am I as just a little human to try and argue against that? You know what I mean?
But what do you
And
say
so I had to accept that. I had to accept marital rape. I had to accept, you know, him beating me up. I had to accept it all.
And what do you say to the people? Because I've had many conversations with people from all religions on Twitter, for example, and in person, and many Muslims. So, for example, my wife, one of her best friends was Sikh, and she married a Muslim and converted, and she became a very well. We moved to Saudi Arabia for a little while, and when she came back, she was as Islamic as you can get, let's just say. But whenever my wife sort of says to this friend of hers, who, by the way, insists on coming out whenever they meet up for a meal or a drink or anything, whenever she says, you know, Islam says that women are inferior to men and that non-Muslims are basically they're not going to heaven, they're not as important, they are less than Islamic people. The response that she gets is always, oh, the people that say all of this, the Islamic people that say all of this, are just misunderstanding Islam.
Of course.
And Islam really is peaceful, and it's inclusive, and it treats women very well. What's your response?
We can see that. Look at the evidence around you, Mark. We know that Islam is peaceful. Right? Obviously, nobody's heard of ISIS. Nobody's heard of Al-Qaeda. Nobody's heard of Boko Haram. Nobody's heard of 9/11. Nobody's heard of all of the stabbings all over all of the bridges all over the UK. Nobody's heard of the Ariana Grande concert. Nobody's heard of Pulse nightclub. Nobody's heard of Charlie Hebdo, right? Like, how can you, this is brainwashing right here. This is what I'm talking about. The evidence is just, you're drowning in evidence to the contrary, but they will still spew what they spew because that is what they have been brainwashed to believe. But the problem isn't even them. The problem is the person listening. The problem is when she tells your friend, those people are wrong, Islam is a religion of peace. At that point, the person who you're speaking to should be like, not in my experience, you know, not by my calculations, you know, like, but we don't do that. We just accept it and we let their lie, you know, perpetuate. They say Islam is a religion of peace and we just nod our heads because we don't want to get involved in it, you know, but we know that that's not true. And this is what I was saying before is they see what I'm doing is ridiculous, but they will look at me and they'll say, oh, that's wonderful. That's so, you know, I'm so proud of you. Or that's such a great, you know, whatever it is, like you're not speaking the truth. And that's really part of my issue here is when there's an atrocity that happens because of the Catholic Church, or there's, you know,
a right winger.
Let's talk about, you know, LGBT, the way that they were treated under the church, right? With the what are those camps called? The group, well, you know, when they try to convince somebody not to be gay anymore. Conversion therapy,
yeah, deconversion.
Yeah. All that stuff was happening, you know, and they're telling gay people that they're going to burn in hell, and they're telling gay people they're lesser than, blah, blah, blah.
Invariably turn out to be gay themselves.
Yes, that's right. But what I mean is we criticize that in the Christian church. We criticize that in the Christian ideology. Nobody has any problem saying the truth when it comes to that. But when it comes to Islam, where they do way worse than the Christian church ever did, right? 15 Muslim majority countries will execute people for being gay. There's no Christian majority country on this planet that will do that.
Or
right?
atheists, for that matter.
Or atheists, absolutely correct. But we don't speak out. Like, so let's say, okay, so you and I are liberals, and we should be supporting the LGBT community. We're supporting the equality, and we're against the discrimination. But they'll only speak out against it when it comes from a Christian context. And when it comes from an Islamic context, they don't say a word.
Is this about guilt, do you think, though? The fact that white nations, I know that's a very generic term, and what does white mean anyway, but white nations in the past have been so racist and so oppressive to so many peoples in the world that maybe now we feel so guilty about our past that many people are afraid to criticize any other culture, any other people, because they're afraid that they will just be doing exactly what our forefathers did.
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
I think that there is first of all cultures, all countries, all peoples are guilty of that.
We've all got
everybody
racism.
Had slaves. Everybody can't right now. Countries like Canada, America, UK, countries that are, that have people from different countries that have immigrated there from different countries, all living together, are way less racist, way less racist than countries that are more homogenous. Like, there's just no comparison. Like, racism isn't even, it's just starting to be a thing in the Arab world.
I suppose we don't have a caste system.
Exactly. In Arabic, when you refer to a black person, the colloquial way of referring to a black person is abid, which means slave. You don't say black, you say slave.
In Greece, that's the word. There's a similar word which refers to Turkish people.
Yes. So exactly. So my point is, when we're talking about racism, this is not just a white problem. This is a human problem. So let's just put that away for a second. Secondly, so you were saying, is that the reason why they're keeping quiet now?
Is it just white guilt?
Is it just guilt? Is it white guilt? Yes, a part of it is white guilt. But my problem here is that this has nothing to do with skin color. We're not talking about races. We're not talking about ethnicities. We're talking about ideologies, which is a completely separate issue. When you look at Muslims, 2.6 billion Muslims, they do not share an ethnicity. They do not share a race. They are from Russia. They are from Bosnia. They are from Indonesia. They are from Egypt. They are from Saudi Arabia. I could go on and on. They're from every corner of this globe. They have every skin color imaginable. They have every ethnicity. And so all the races are represented. This is not a racial issue. This is not a ethnic issue. This has nothing to do with the innate, immutable characteristics of a person. This has to do with an ideology. It has to do with a dogma. That is the thing that we are criticizing. And so that is the thing that we should be unapologetic about criticizing. And if somebody tries to silence us by using words like bigot or Islamophobe or racist or whatever like that, you need to be aware that those people are just using words to silence your criticism because they do not want you to criticize their religion. And when you are silenced, you have given them what they want. They have succeeded. They are no different than the jihadis that will kill the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists because they do not want criticism of their religion on that magazine. So they will murder people. And those are the jihadis. And then the Islamists, instead of using violence to silence people, they're using these words to silence people. At the end of the day, both are serving the same purpose. And when you bite your tongue, they have both succeeded.
And the strange thing is, if anything, I seem to get more problems from fellow white people in this issue.
Yeah.
when I've debated Islam with, well, with Muslims, yes, occasionally I've been told that I'm going to burn in hell or whatever, but usually they try to kind of have a bit of a debate with me. Whereas when it's white people that criticize me, they just straight away jump to, oh, look at you, you're white, you're male, you're showing your white fragility, you're showing your white privilege. And that is the end of the conversation as far as they're aware. I have nothing to say. I should get in my lane, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that getting my lane thing annoys me so much because as a biologist, I realized that actually there's no such thing as race. Not really. We share most of our DNA. Race is just a bit of skin pigmentation and a few facial features. And in the ancient times, for example, in Greece, there weren't words for different races. It was just, which city are you from? It seems to be a new concept. But what do you say to people that are confronted with this argument whenever they try to talk about Islam, that are, you know, if they're white, if they're male, etc., etc.? What do you say we should do when someone comes up to us and says, shut up, you're white, this is none of your business?
So what I'm hearing when somebody says, shut up, you're white, it's none of your business, what I'm hearing is the quintessential racism. Because imagine if someone were to say to me, shut up, you're brown and you're a woman. Why is it okay to say to you, shut up, you're white and a man? So what they're doing is they're taking your immutable characteristics and they're using it as some sort of weapon. And that is racist, right? Like, so they are the ones that are being the racists in this scenario. They're the ones that are being the bigots. So throw it back at them. And just don't accept it. Just keep going. Just keep talking. Don't accept it. I mean, when I was talking about the Sam Harris episode with Bill Maher, or the Bill Maher episode with Sam Harris that I mentioned earlier on, that's really what made me speak out, was because all of the criticism against Sam and against Bill, nobody said a word about their message. Nobody said a word about what they were actually saying. Instead, everybody was attacking the fact that they were white American men. That's it.
Yeah,
they didn't even listen to what they said. They just said they're white American men, so we're going to, you know, dismiss anything they have to say.
And Sam seemed to keep his cool very well.
He did keep his cool, yeah.
Over meditation, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, he did a great job, and he has continued to do a great job, you know. And Richard Dawkins has continued to do a great job. And, you know, Ricky Gervais has continued to do a great job. And you shouldn't just, I know that these are people that are in a different realm, obviously, because they're, you know, they're already so big, kind of like what's happening with J.K. Rowling. There is a point where you're too big to be canceled.
They can't be hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. But for the rest of us, you know, there are definitely consequences, but
I have been threatened on
Twitter. Choose
your
consequences. Yeah, you
people
choose
have said
your
to
consequences.
Me, they will contact my university and tell them about all the horrible things I say on Twitter. I don't know what these horrible things are. But...
Yeah. That's what they do, though. See, this is why the subtitle of my book is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam, because they are literally, remember when I mentioned that you have the Islamists that silence you by calling you a bigot and Islamophobe, and you have the jihadis that silence you by calling you, or by actually killing you. You know, these, you know, liberal white knights are empowering the radical Muslims. When they silence you, they are empowering the extremist Muslims. They don't silence them. They're silencing you and your criticism of them.
What is the solution to this? I mean, is there a solution?
Just keep
Is it
talking.
going to get worse before it gets better, do you think?
I think that I feel that there is a bit of a change in the wind right now. Now, maybe I'm being a hopeless optimist about this, but...
Well, you talk to your students as I do, so I suppose you get a feel for their opinions on this matter.
Yeah, the change in the wind that I'm feeling though is more like, Barry Weiss recently just resigned from the New York Times. Andrew Sullivan also resigned from his position in another New York magazine. And Ayan Hirsi Ali is starting to speak out more now than she has in the past. Um, Bill Maher is speaking up in support of, um, of Barry Weiss. There was that letter, the Harper's Magazine letter, that was signed by so many people, including J.K. Rowling. And I'm starting to
But she's a
feel, I mean,
transphobe,
even
apparently.
Noam, yeah, right. Even Noam Chomsky, for goodness sake. I saw somebody posted a video, a screenshot of a interaction between him and Noam Chomsky where he was telling Noam, that this cancel culture and these people, like they're really angry about you signing that Harper's letter, and Noam responds by saying, "Oh, that's nothing compared to the attacks I've been getting privately. It's so much worse than what you're even seeing publicly." So, people that have been purveyors and supporters, because let's be honest, J.K. Rowling supported this cancel culture when she was on the other side of it. She was doing a lot of virtue signaling. But then the mob eventually comes for you.
They always
You
do.
will. Nobody will be pure enough ever, and so there's a shift now where those people that used to be the purveyors and the supporters of this have now found that the mob has come for them, and so they are now. And Barry Weiss is another example of that, where they're now coming up on the other side and saying, "Okay, enough of this. This is not cool." Noam Chomsky being another. So
Well,
that's
would you
good
call
to
it
see.
conservatism, really, rather than liberalism? Because
No,
no, because
I wouldn't.
when I see a lot of these people that are basically, going on about white privilege and everything, it seems not a conservative idea as in white supremacy, but conservative as in very locked down in their thought processes, not open to other thought processes.
I think they're authoritarian.
I suppose that's more of a definition, isn't it? That's a better definition.
Yes,
Yes,
I think they're authoritarian, totalitarian. It
which isn't
reminds me
about
so much
liberalism.
of
That's not
growing up Muslim.
liberalism, in my opinion.
No,
Mm.
I don't know if we're having the same conversation. I don't know if we're talking about the same people, but
Well,
no.
no, my point was basically just that the sort of people that are basically saying, okay, you're showing your white privilege, we should have cancel
Oh,
culture, etc.,
oh,
etc. I almost see those as conservative in their thought processes, meaning that they are not open to ideas that don't fit the tight little way of thinking. Whereas liberalism, in my opinion, is about being open to other ideas.
yes. So I agree. I hear what you're saying, and I wouldn't classify them as conservative. I would classify them as totalitarian, as authoritarian. But authoritarians can come from the left wing or the right wing, right?
True.
You've got communists on the left wing, and then you've got the Muslims, the radical, like the Islamists, on the right wing. Islam is an incredibly conservative religion. So I think authoritarians can come on, like Sharia law, for example. Like evangelical Muslims could only wish that they had anything similar to that. Evangelical Christians, right? So I do think that there is definitely a separate, like for a long time, liberals have been saying the pull is going too much to the left. You're starting to become authoritarian. You're going too much to the opposite direction because you're trying to counter Trump so badly that you find yourself like supporting Iran, like now you've crossed the line. But our voices haven't been heard because it wasn't hurting the big intellectuals or the big journalists or the big media. They were okay with it because it was serving their purpose. But it's reached a point now where it's not serving them anymore. It's reached a point where they've realized it has gone too far to the left. And I think the rest of the world has already known that, which is why, I mean, even though Joe Biden has dementia, clearly, they still wouldn't, unfortunately for him,
that's the best they could
and
come
for
up
America
with.
if he becomes the president. But, you know, the American people were still, they didn't want a Bernie Sanders. They, you know, they didn't want any of the far left ideologies. They were still more wanting to bet on the centrist, you know, what is seen as a centrist.
I think
so I think most people absolutely
really
agree with you.
They're just
Absolutely.
afraid to...
Most people are just old school liberals.
Yeah.
And you've got the crazies on the far left and the crazies on the far right that are just like yelling over us, and we're in the middle being like, hey guys.
Being hated by both. Being hated by
being
both.
hated by both. Absolutely agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm becoming aware of the time now. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you have marking to do. But there were a couple of points I did want to get through. I've literally gone through hardly any of my questions, I think, but I think this has been great anyway. But I did want you to sort of, obviously it's all in the book, Unveiled, which I recommend all of my followers to buy. So I did want you to, well, maybe give an overview of how you left Islam, how you ended up where you were now. I'd love to get that overview before we finish. And then I would also like you to very briefly tell me about, which question was it? It's over here somewhere. I should have put this in a bigger font. But I wanted you to talk about free from hijab and also free hearts, free minds. So if you could tell me how you got out of Islam, and if you could at least take a few moments to then tell me about free from hijab and free hearts, free minds.
Sure.
That would be great.
So the way I got out of it was actually when I was in university, still a hijabi, still a Muslim, but living a free life with my daughter and I. And I came across a course called History of Religions, and it said it was going to focus on the 3 monotheistic religions. And I thought, well, I know a third of this curriculum with my eyes closed, you know, I could ace this in my sleep. So I thought, well, I'll take this as an easy elective, never thinking that that was going to be the course that would change my life. And I took the course, and my professor was a Lebanese man of Christian descent. He currently didn't believe in any religions, but he was raised Christian in Lebanon. And so
which is quite a liberal country, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, Lebanon used to be Christian majority, and not anymore. There was a vicious war there between the Muslims and the Christians. They have a history, you know, like, I don't know if you know about Gad Saad, but Gad Saad is a Jewish Lebanese man. So it used to be inclusive of other religions, not so anymore.
Okay.
But anyway, it's not as bad as other countries, but it's not as good as it used to be. But anyway, he was my professor. So he spoke, he knew, he wasn't afraid, he didn't have the white guilt, you know, he wasn't afraid to point out things to me in the Quran that he knew had been probably I hadn't seen before, or that I hadn't really analyzed critically before. Because I'd read the Quran front to back, but you're not encouraged to do anything more than just chant it, you know, like an Italian chanting, or sorry, monks chanting, or Italian opera or something. You hear the sounds and you repeat the sounds, but you don't think about what they mean, and you don't ever critically analyze them. You don't question them at all. And so in this class with him was the very first time I was able to do that, or I was allowed to do that. And it didn't take long before it all started to unravel, because it really is, you know, from an objective perspective, if somebody were to go on Quran.com right now, it would not take them very long before they recognized, wow, this book is just full of violence. It is
the Bible.
Yeah, like, it's just, the difference is the Bible is metaphorical. I mean, I guess if you look at the Old Testament, then it would be more comparable.
Deuteronomy, I would say.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you'd read that. It doesn't take you long before you're like, whoa, this is crazy, right? So, there were certain passages in the Quran that where we critically analyzed them and we talked about them, and it just it pushed my cognitive dissonance to the point that it broke. I couldn't pretend anymore. All of the things that I believed to be true because I was indoctrinated to believe them to be true, with my adult brain, I couldn't justify it. I couldn't rationalize it. It was just beyond ridiculous. And, these are simple things like when in the Quran where Allah, who like literally wrote the Quran. It's not like the Bible where it's metaphors and stories. No, this is like his verbatim. This is what he said, right? So he talks about, I've spread the earth for you flat like a carpet. There's talk about the sperm coming from the backbone. There's, there's a hadith about camel urine and how it cures all ailments. Like all sorts of crazy stuff like that. The rocks and leaves, or sort of rocks and trees will speak out. When Muslims and Jews are fighting each other, if a Jew tries to hide behind a rock, the rock will say, "Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me."
That didn't help back in the 70s, did it?
Yeah, that's right. And all of the trees will speak out and tell the Muslims there's a Jew hiding behind you, except for one specific kind of tree, and that's this one tree won't speak. And it's just, you read this stuff and you're like, when you take away all of the like divinity, when you're not scared to question it, it's so easy to question. It's mind-blowingly shocking that you ever accepted this as reality. But when you're not allowed to question it, I guess it's like Scientologists when they start telling you about Xenu and whatever, at that point you're like, okay, I guess we're all aliens or whatever it is. Like you've been indoctrinated for so long that it costs too much to question it,
Christianity and the Ark, two of every animal.
Yes.
The kangaroos came
they
all
all fit on one boat,
for example.
and all the bugs.
And all the boats,
yeah.
and the predators, and the herbivores, and
They
the
lived in
saltwater
harmony.
fish, and the freshwater fish somehow. I never quite understood that.
Yeah. They're all just hanging out on this ark together. Yeah. So, and when you're a kid and you read these stories, you're not questioning them all too much. But when you're an adult, you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. So that's really what happened to me.
So you questioned Islam, and you came to the conclusion that it was not true.
And then it's a slow unraveling after that. It's not like a light switch. It takes a while because the indoctrination is deep into your bones, and so it takes a long time. You're almost getting re-socialized. Majid Nawaz in his book Radical talks about how he talked about the metaphor he gave was like of a building, and it just had to get demolished and then rebuilt brick by brick, just one brick at a time. And that's the best metaphor for it. You sit there with every single brick and you turn it over and you look at it and you think about it and you're like, is this a brick that I want in my foundation? Is this something I believe? Is this something I agree with? Because you're not used to doing that. You're not used to using your brain to think at all. You're only used to do as you're told, like a soldier in war. And you don't, to question is dangerous, is wrong. You'll be punished for it. You have to just do it quickly without thinking.
That is
so
religion,
you eventually
isn't
don't
it?
think. That's religion, yeah.
The magic book, whichever book it happens to be, has all of the answers. And to question those answers is just wrong. And
makes
evil.
you the bad person. Yeah.
So you'd come across to believing, to disbelieving the faith that you were brought up in. But how then did you get away from your family, your community, your husband? How did that work?
Oh, that that's very long and convoluted, and I'm gonna have to refer your
The book.
listeners to my book. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's just too much of,
it is
that
too
was not an
much.
easy process.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that was a long, convoluted, just by the skin of my teeth. I'm sitting here
Mm.
talking to you today. Really, it was just,
That is the impression I got. And I do recommend to my followers that you definitely read the book, because it is a harrowing story. I've not been able to touch on this much just because of time constraints. I mean, you have had a life. You've
mhm,
had a life already, and there's so much we just couldn't go into in this time frame. But yes, the book does cover this in detail, and it is. I mean, it's quite
mhm,
distressing. I mean, obviously for you, but when my wife read the book, she was in tears. I mean, she was in
mhm,
tears about it. But yeah, that's something to maybe catch up on in the book. So perhaps we should
mhm.
finish now. Perhaps if you could talk a little bit about free from hijab, and about free hearts, free minds, and then we can maybe wrap it up.
Okay, so Free from Hijab is a campaign that I started to support women who have chosen to remove their hijab. So, removing your hijab can come with all sorts of consequences, from losing your family, from friends calling you a whore, from your community looking down on you, to getting acid thrown in your face, to being imprisoned, to even being killed. So, women, it sounds like, oh, it's just a piece of cloth, but people are not realizing that that's actually the shackles. That's the physical representation of the imprisonment of women. And so when a woman removes this cloth off of her head and her head is free, then her mind will be able to be free. And that's what I want for women, and that's what I encourage them to do, and that's what I support them in doing. So I say I encourage them to do, but for example, there's something called hijab day, where they encourage women to wear hijab for the day. They go around and they set up booths all over in different establishments, and they put hijabs on non-believing women, and they encourage them to wear hijab for the day. So the exact opposite of that would be for me to encourage women to take off their hijab for the day. But of course, I could never do that. I would never do that, because I know the consequences of that could be that this woman would lose her life. And so instead, what I do is I say, if you have chosen to do that, then I'm here to support you.
Mm.
And so Free from Hijab has been going on for about 3 to 4 years now. And there are thousands and thousands of women from all over the world, from Yemen, Turkey, Sweden, France, Canada, Germany, all over, that have been sharing their stories of how they were coerced and forced into wearing hijab. Maybe they were indoctrinated into wearing it from a young age, like I was, through being told the stories of, like, don't you want to be good and pure and go to heaven and be a good girl, or do you want to be a filthy whore that gets raped? And so those women that are growing up and deciding that they want to have autonomy over their own bodies, they want to choose what they want to put on their own bodies, and them sharing their empowering stories of getting free from hijab. So that's what that's all about. And Free Hearts, Free Minds is my organization that I started, which basically offers mental health support to people who have left Islam but are living in Muslim majority countries, where they have to deal with the trauma of knowing that they could lose their job, they could lose their family, they could lose their lives, because a lot of those people are living in countries where not only is it illegal to leave Islam, you could be executed, that's your punishment, but you could also just be, like in Bangladesh, hacked to death in the street with machetes by vigilantes, or in Pakistan, beaten to death by your peers. So there's not only the fear of the government, but there's the fear of your society surrounding you as well.
Mm.
So people who have left Islam, we prioritize people from the LGBT community and women, but we do offer help and support to anybody who's living in those traumatic circumstances. and just support them to be able to survive, to be able, there's a lot of just suicide prevention essentially, and helping them to, through individualized tools, to figure out what's the best route for you to get to a better life. Because there's not one answer for everybody. It really depends on their personal circumstance, and it depends on the country they're living in, and depends on their finances and so many things. So it's an individualized support to help apostates in ex-Muslim or in Muslim majority countries.
And a very worthy one as well. I will very briefly tell you a story from one of my students some time ago. I had a Saudi student, and her mother was from the West. She converted, father from Saudi, quite an elderly father. And she'd never been out of Saudi really until she came to the UK to be a student, to study biology. And her father was quite liberal, actually, and allowed her to wear Western clothes and to just enjoy herself while she was over here. But then her father became quite sick and was basically terminally ill. And one day after a class, she came up to me, and this must have been very difficult for her considering her background. She said, "Can I have a chat with you on your own?" And she literally hugged me and said, "I'm afraid because my father's dying, which means my brother will now be in charge of my destiny.
Yeah.
And he doesn't believe in the Western liberal values, and he's just going to call me back. Apparently the Saudi embassy can just revoke my visa on his permission, and I will be sent back, and I will be married off, and that will be that." And I didn't know what to do, because I still don't know what to do. I mean, all I could do was try to be comforting and say I hope things are going to work out well, and but I couldn't really give any advice because I've never been able to give advice in this matter, and I still don't know what I should have said other than be comforting.
Well, I think that it's lucky that her mother, you said, is Western, so hopefully she has another passport, and she could have gone to seek asylum in that country of wherever she has another citizenship from. But as long as she has Saudi citizenship, then her brother is her guardian. So they have actual guardians, which is based on a in the Quran, men are the guardians of women. And therefore in Saudi Arabia, there will every woman, even if she's a grandmother, every woman will have a man who guards her, whether it be her father or her husband or her brother, in some cases, even her son. Women are never independent. They always have to be dependent on a man.
What should I say in such a situation? I'm trying not to put you
I
on
would
the spot,
encourage her. I would encourage her to seek asylum.
Again, I would say that sort of conversation.
I think she was lucky in that she has another citizenship, and that her mother, you said, is from the West. But even if she didn't, I would encourage her to not leave, to stay where she was, not go back to Saudi Arabia, and to seek asylum.
Okay.
Yeah, because if she goes back, she's done for. She knows that. She'd be married off, and that's it.
This was a few years ago now. And I don't know the current fate of her, to be absolutely honest, or even how to find out. But I do want to try to be more prepared in future if I encounter the same situation. Okay, so I think we should probably wrap up a little bit now. So where can people find out about you? Where can they follow you? How can they find out? How can Muslim women that are basically in situations such as you used to be in get in contact with you or your organizations to find out more?
So I have a website, yasminemohammed.com, and if you go there and click on contact, you can send me a message. And it has all my social media there. I'm on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter. And my organization is www.freeheartsfreeminds.com. And people can also go there and seek support. And the therapist that I work with is based in the UK. And he doesn't only work with my charity. So with Free Hearts, Free Minds, it's only for people that are living in Muslim majority countries. But quite often we have people who are living in the UK that go to him for support. but just their funding wouldn't be covered by my organization, but they can find funding from different avenues because they're lucky enough to be living in a country with a government that is supportive of mental health support, which is not the case for many Muslim majority countries.
Well, thank you very much, Yasmine, for this conversation. It's been
My
very
pleasure.
enlightening. And I recommend everyone once again to read the book, Unveiled. You will, honestly, it will be enlightening. It really will. Thank you very much for this chat.
My pleasure,
Bye.
Mark. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Thank you very much for listening. Yasmine mentioned how you can find out more about her if you are interested. As for myself, Dr. Mark Darcy, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @MarkOfTheD, MarkOfthe, and my website is scienceontheedge.com. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and I hope to speak to you all again very soon. Goodbye for now.